This episode of Monster Memories is brought to you by the one and only Fangoria magazine. Use the promo code DeadNoiseBlog for 20% off your magazine and merch orders when you visit shop.fangoria.com. I love how this series is probably the most well-received thing I do, but it's also something that I rarely do anymore. I still have a bunch of ideas for more of these types of videos in the future, so don't get it twisted, these aren't stopping anytime soon, but I just find it funny how I unintentionally go almost a year between making these videos now. That being said, it would be completely idiotic of me to not acknowledge the 50th anniversary of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre today. A lot of people already started celebrating on October 1st because that's when it first premiered in Austin, Texas, but I always go by the wide release date, which was October 11th. Now, the sheer impact of this movie can't be understated because not only has it become one of the most well-known slasher franchises, but it was also one of the first, and it helped set the blueprint for the subgenre. It's also a bit of a feel-good story to see such a small independent movie like this reach such a high level of success and provide inspiration for the generations that followed. I mean, up until the release of Halloween in 1978, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was actually the highest grossing independent movie, and it was the 12th highest grossing film made in 1974. So for starters, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre featured one of the first examples of the final girl trope that's become synonymous with slasher films now, with some of the most popular examples being Nancy Thompson from Nightmare on Elm Street, Sidney Prescott in Scream, Laurie Strode in Halloween, and most recently Sienna Shaw from the Terrifier franchise. The term final girl was coined by Carol Clover in her book Men, Women, and Chainsaws, which discusses gender roles in modern horror movies, and she heavily cites the character of Sally Hardesty in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, using her as an example many times throughout her description of the character archetype of the final girl. Another genre gimmick that this movie adopted was the usual quote-unquote based on a true story tagline that's far beyond stale today, but it was still effective enough back then to get people to see it. I'm pretty sure that at this point everybody knows that the movie was loosely inspired by the behaviors of Ed Gein, who was a grave robber and a murderer, and he actually lived close to the relatives of Tobe Hooper, the film's writer and director. But there are way too many liberties taken for the movie to really be considered a retelling of real-life events. However, the filmmakers did bring a bit of a tone of authenticity to the production, with the gritty overall aesthetic of the movie kinda being a byproduct of its small budget. With some montage-style edits here and there, and also no musical score, there's also a lot of times where it feels like an actual documentary with some kind of fly-on-the-wall type of approach. This sense of realism is what really makes the movie scary in my opinion, because it feels like something like this could just happen to anybody. What's always funny to me is also the revisionist history that comes with talking about this movie with people who have either never seen it or haven't watched it in a long time. I mean, the title alone paints a pretty gruesome picture, but the movie itself really isn't extremely graphic or gory. A lot of the violence is shown off screen, but the grainy, grindhouse style aesthetic makes it feel so much more bloody and in your face than it actually is. Also, not for nothing, but there's also an underwhelming amount of chainsaw action. There's only one kill scene involving a chainsaw, and the only other time it's used is at the end when Leatherface cuts his own leg. Granted, this is excusable though, because number one, the other kills in this movie are great, but also, given the budget and the fact that they used a real chainsaw during production, it was probably best to limit its use for the sake of safety. Also, that classic final shot with Leatherface outside swinging the chainsaw around was 100% authentic and not scripted. Gunnar Hansen was directed to look aggravated or frustrated, but he took his actions to the level that he did in an attempt to freak out Tobe Hooper because of how he treated the cast during the production. Filming this movie was an arduous process for a lot of the cast, especially during the dinner scene towards the end of the movie. On top of the Texas heat at over 100 degrees, not including the heat coming from the production lights, the dinner scene was filmed at the end of a 27-hour day, so you can just imagine the temperaments and discomfort of everybody on set, not to mention the stench of the meat and food that was sitting out the entire time. Gunnar Hansen has even said that there wasn't a lot of acting going on in that scene, because by that point, everyone in the cast was exhausted and began to feel like they were going insane. Hansen also never got to take the Leatherface mask off during this entire time, and Ed Neal, who plays the hitchhiker, has said on many occasions that the making of this movie was more exhausting and miserable than the time he spent serving in the Vietnam War, if that's any indication of how intense this production was. For what it's worth though, the end result made for one of the most impactful films of the horror genre, and it even had a couple positive effects on people. First, the crime in Texas went down as a result of less people picking up hitchhikers, and some filmmakers, including Guillermo del Toro, cited this film as an inspiration to become vegetarian, which I guess isn't a huge surprise given the obvious nods to the work done in slaughterhouses, including the fact that the score is just made up of sounds heard in a slaughterhouse instead of musical instruments. Now, I've been a horror fan since my age was in the single digits, but I didn't see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre until I was in high school for obvious reasons. I'd read about Leatherface before then, but never actually saw any scenes from the movies until I was maybe 16 years old. At that time, it was the grittiest movie I've ever seen, and I didn't really have the appreciation for it that I do now until my senior year of college when I rewatched it with my roommates at the time. After watching it and talking with them about it afterwards, I had a better understanding of the film, and I gained a greater appreciation for some of the production qualities, like the grainy aesthetic and the non-musical score, which are now two of my favorite things about the entire movie. And while it might not be one of my favorites because I have to be in a certain headspace to rewatch it, I still think it's one of the most important contributions to the horror genre. If you want to learn more about the movie and the historical context of the production, I highly recommend checking out St. John Chapman's video about it. I'm gonna have a link in the description. He has a much more academic approach to film discussion, and if you want to hear more about that side of things, he's the guy to listen to. So until the next video, thank you for watching, and steer clear of hitchhikers.